Hello, it's Sonia here with The Pretty Stitch. Welcome to my channel. If this is your first time joining me, I'm so happy to have you here. So today is Tuesday, and that means it's Tunisian Tuesday. So today we're going to be featuring a stitch pattern, and I am using my H hook or 5mm hook, and I've just popped a rubber band on the end to keep my stitches from falling off, and I'm just using this little ball of yarn. I don't know the brand of it. It's a really pretty pink. It's shiny. I've been going through my yarn and I found a whole bunch of little tiny just scraps, like little balls of yarn, so I'm trying to figure out what to do with it. And I would say this is like a DK weight yarn, but you could use a variety of yarn types and hook sizes with this stitch pattern. So to do this stitch pattern, what you'll need to do is you're going to need to chain a multiple of 3 and add 2. So why don't we chain 14? Because 3 times 4 is 12, and you add 2 and it's 14. Okay, so here are my 14 chains, and we're going to get started on row 1. And if you've never done Tunisian crochet before, I do have a complete playlist that goes over the basics. Alright, so let's begin. So we're going to begin row 1. We're going to work in the back bump of the chain. I'm just turning it over on the other side and working that second chain from my hook in that back bump, and I'm pulling up a loop. And I'm going to continue working in my back bumps, pulling up loops. And with Tunisian crochet, it is always worked in 2 parts. Part 1 of the row is putting the stitches on the hook, which is often called the forward pass. And part 2 is taking the stitches off your hook, and that is called the return pass. So each row consists of 2 parts or 2 steps. Okay, so I should have 14 loops on my hook. So let's begin our return pass. So we're going to take the stitches off of our hook. And this stitch pattern is kind of a take on another one I did a while ago. It's a lacier type of stitch pattern. So this one is a little bit similar, but a little bit different. It's a similar technique. So to begin the return pass, it's going to be a little bit different than what we're used to doing. So instead of yarning over, pulling through 1 loop, we are actually going to chain 2. So 1, 2. And then a lot of times we'll yarn over and pull through 2 loops for the entire row. We're not going to do that. Like I said, this return pass is a little bit different. We're going to yarn over and we're going to pull through 4 loops. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And now we are going to chain 2. And we're going to pull through, yarn over and pull through 4 loops again. So 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we're going to chain 2. And we're going to repeat that across, so yarning over, pulling through 4 loops, chaining 2. We're going to pull through 4 loops until we have 2 loops left on our hook. So to finish up, we're going to chain 1 instead of 2, we're just chaining 1, and then yarn over, pull through the remaining 2 loops. And there is our return pass. So it creates these tiny little shells. And I do have another stitch pattern that's similar to this. Alright, so let's begin row 2. So row 2, we're actually going to work a row of purl stitches across. So to do that, we're going to have our yarn in front. We're going to insert our hook into that first chain, just on that top loop of that chain, and work our purl stitch. And we're going to work a purl stitch. We're purling all the way across this row, and we're going to work on top of that little shell. You'll see a little loop. Let me grab, I like to use my double pointed needles for showing things. So there's a little loop right there on top. We're going to insert our hook in there. But we're going to purl, so we're going to have the yarn in front, work in that loop, and work the purl stitch. So now we're going to purl 2 times in that chain. There's 2 chains there. So yarn over and just grab that top loop of that first chain and work the purl stitch. Grab top loop of the next chain, work your purl stitch, and we're going to work on that loop on top of that shell stitch, working purl. And we're going to continue across. We're just going to be purling in each chain and on top of the shell stitch. So at the end of our forward pass of row 2, we will have again 14 loops on our hook. So, oops, I'm not purling, sorry. Let's get it correct. My yarn is splitting. So this row is a purl row. So this stitch pattern should lay more flat. A lot of Tunisian stitch patterns tend to curl, and you have to block them or add purl stitches to help them lay flat. Purl stitches are a help when mixing them in with other Tunisian stitches so that it doesn't curl up. Alright, so we're almost done. So I'm going to work that purl stitch on top of that shell. So we should have 12 stitches on our hook. So 1, 2, 3. So we do. So we need to work 2 more so that again we have 14 loops. So whatever amount you chained, you always will have the same amount of loops. So you just want to keep that in mind. Alright, so we do have 2 chains here. Here's 1 chain, here's another chain. So in the second to the last chain, we are going to work that purl stitch. And in the very last chain, we're going to work in the center of that stitch. So we're not going to do a purl stitch, and that just will create our edging. So I'm just working in the center of that chain, pulling up a loop. So I have my 14 loops on my hook. So there's our row 2 before our return pass. So what we're going to do is we are going to do the same return pass for row 2 as we did for row 1. So to begin, you're going to chain 2. And we're going to pull through 4 loops. So yarn over, pull through 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And we're chaining 2. And we're going to pull through 4 loops. Chaining 2. We're going to do this all the way across until we have 2 loops left on our hook. So we have those 2 loops left. We're going to chain 1 and yarn over, pull through the remaining 2 to complete the row. So what you're going to do for the remainder of the stitch pattern is just repeat row 2. So let's do that one more time because this is a little bit different than most other Tunisian crochet stitch patterns because the return pass is a little bit different than what you normally do. Alright, so we are going to work in purl again. So for row 3, so yarn over in front, and we're going to insert that hook in that top loop of the chain and work our purl stitch. And we're going to work on top of that shell, working the purl stitch, yarn in front, finding that loop, and we're going to work on in the top loop on this in the next 2 chains. Again, working those purl stitches, and we're going to work on the top of that shell all the way across. So I'm at my final 2 chains, so we're going to work that purl stitch. So the second to the last chain, you'll work the purl stitch, And then that last chain on the bottom there, you just insert it in the center and pull up a loop. And there we go. And again, we're going to work that return pass the same. So we're chaining 2 and yarning over, pulling through 4 loops. Chaining 2, yarning over, pulling through 4 loops until we have 2 loops left on our hook. And then we have those 2 loops left. We're going to chain 1 and then yarn over, pull through the final 2. So again, just repeat row 2 for however big you want your swatch, and then we'll work our bind off row. Okay, so here we go. I ended up working 8 rows and I already did the bind off row, but I have another swatch using thicker yarn. So this is number 4 yarn, and I used a J hook or 6mm hook. So I will show you the bind off on this guy, and I worked 6 rows. So you can see the difference in the stitch using the larger hook and the heavier yarn, and I think it looks really nice. So what we're going to do for binding off is we are going to be working in pattern here. So in that first chain we're going to work in purl, so the yarn is in the front, and working on that top loop of that chain and just working the bind off in purl. And again, just want to watch your tension when you're doing your bind off row. So I'm working on top of that shell stitch there, and now I'm going to work on that next chain, just working the bind off in purl all the way across, and the next one. And if you're not familiar with binding off, I do have that in the playlist. Just gives your swatch or project that finishing touch. So we've got our 2 chains left, so that second to last chain, working that purl, and then in that very last one we go in the chain and we work the bind off, and there we go. So as you can see, this one does lay flat, and I think it's a really pretty stitch. It has like those pretty little, almost looks like little beads in front of the shell stitches, so you can see the difference using the different yarns. I actually preferred, I think, using this the larger hook. I feel like it gives the stitch a little bit of a lacier look, but it is very nice with this yarn as well. And again, it lays nice and flat. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and if you did, please like and subscribe, and thank you so much for watching.